Okay. So yesterday we laid out the three factors that work together to exempt Talmidei Chachamim from taxes. The first was that which opened the sugya, which was the claim that they don't need security. Rabbanan lo tzrichin netiruta. And we noted that in that part of the sugya, it sounds like what obligates you in taxes is simply, right, you're paying for services. So if you don't need it, you don't pay for it. And yet, when the Gemara actually invokes various psukim as proofs to that argument, none of them seem to actually head in that direction. Some of them focus more on kavod issues, and that's especially accentuated at the end of the Gemara, when the Gemara says, or at least as the potentially at the end of the Gemara, when it talks about the case of the cisterns, that it's not the way of Talmidei Chachamim to be working manually that way. And the Ezra psukim either can be read as kavod, meaning it's not honorable for them to be paying these taxes, or it's a trade, right? That no, the reason that they're exempt is because they're already contributing to society in a different way, right? That's where we were. And we noted the Rambam seems to accept all three of those implications, exempts them from security tax because of the lack of need, and that appears in halacha-theory, which is talking about obligations of the community, but is much more expansive in terms of what he exempts them from in halacha Torah, and he brings it there in the context of the things you have to do to honor Talmidei Chachamim, which is beyond the taxes issue. And in Hilchot Shemitah V'Yovel, the Rambam starts with his discussion of Leviim and Kohanim, who are exempt from going to war and certain things because of this trade relationship, but then he ends with this halacha-theory statement that Talmidei Chachamim are the same way, which does seem to be that the Rambam is reading all three of these as being true, which leads us to a potentially more expansive category. And what we'd left off with yesterday was one way of looking at these three is that they're three independently functioning rationales, but the other is to say no, that they're primary rationales, but it's specifically the existence of these three that creates the category of Talmid Chacham. So to test this, right, to test the exact way, we have to look through different potential implications that will help us really flesh out the ideas here. So first I want to turn to, did you read the Ramban? It's really the first one I wanted to go to, but okay, so let's read the Ramban. I definitely sent you the link. I have a hard copy here, which is easier for me. What? Did yesterday. Okay, fine. So let's try reading through the Ramban. So the Ramban writes as follows. So first he just quotes Rashi in terms of defining the different types of taxes. Okay? There's Rashi, Zechron L'Racha, Migviat Misim, from the collection of tax. Arnona is Yisurei Tvot Behemot Shana B'Shana. Right? Arnona is a 10% tax on animals and produce. V'cheni Kar Behema V'Yisa Shal Igviu Mimenu Yisur Shal Melech Nekreid Behemat Arnona. V'Yisad Arnona V'Logdei V'Varshim Sh'Amru Shutafot. He goes through all different taxes. But this is the claim I want to focus on. He says, "V'nir'eh she'ein Talmidei Chachamim p'turin isurei tvuatam v'lo mikesef gulgaltam ela kishahamelech meitil al b'nei ha'ir litein kach v'kach b'pidyon gulgaltam v'kach v'kach b'maaser tvuotam v'hem yispeku b'neihem." The Ramban argues that the exemption of taxes is only in a case where the tax is framed as a communal obligation that the community owes $1 million, and then you figure out how to divide it up. Lefi sheyecholin Talmidei Chachamim lomar lo hitil hamelech aleinu klum ela b'shvilchem. Because then the Talmidei Chachamim can say that the king only put this obligation on us because of you. Aval im amar hamelech litein kol echad ve'echad kesef gulgalto, but if the king framed it as a head tax that each person is obligated, ein ha'amei haaretz porin b'shvil Talmidei Chachamim, so then the Amei Haaretz don't pay for the Talmidei Chachamim. Ela im ratzah hamelech limchol lahem yimchol. The king wants to, so then he can waive it. V'lo od ela de malka lo torach ela amar kach legach an Hashem yeshkan v'kach legach chayav kol echad ve'echad. And the king, right, didn't put in the effort. He just said such and such people are here, and each one is obligated. V'im tafas miyachid mehem o meirabim al yidei kulam kidinei ba'in Amei Haaretz govin mitalmidei chachamim. Right, if he says one person should collect on behalf of everybody, but he's right to collect, so then again you collect from Talmidei Chachamim. And he quotes Rabbeinu Hananel to this effect. Rabbeinu Hananel zal katav kol ele kigon sheyesh aleihem devar katzuv b'maza gulgolot o b'taxid de'aro barnona marichin kol echad umekabtzin oto b'meineihem ein al t'micham l'sayam lo leteit lehem be'elu klub. Okay, so the Ramban says that the only type of tax that you're exempt from is a communal tax that is then subdivided amongst the individuals, but not an individual tax. Okay? Who disagrees with that? So a lot of people do, but we've already seen one of them. The Rambam. I just sort of skipped over it because the Rambam goes out of his way to say he doesn't agree with that assessment. All right, the Rambam says whether it's a head tax or a communal tax. Many Rishonim believe this. Yeah, Rama argues. Many Rishonim argue. Yeah. So that was the question I was going to ask you, right? So explain this to me, right? What is the nature of this machlokas as to whether these exemptions apply only when it's on the community and then it's subdivided, or if it even applies for an individual? Yeah. So what do you think? What do you explain that? How do you explain the machloket? Right? Why would you say there's a difference? Now, many Rishonim, right, disagree with the Ramban. So, Rama argues. You look at the Rush. Second, the Rush argues. What?
Then the people who are being taxed are still getting taxed like that. Therefore, you shouldn't cover those things.
Okay, so let's flesh it out, right? So what Yehuda is saying, which maybe what the Ramban is saying, is look, but let's flesh it out. According to the Ramban, he says that if it's on the community, so then, right, what does the Ramban say? Then you can plausibly construe it that this tax was imposed on the community, and quoting Rebbe from later in the sugya, all bad things happen because of Amay Ma'aretz. It's not our fault. Right? We didn't really need it. And therefore, so you make a jump, which I don't know if you have to make, but I think you're 90% right and 10% maybe right? Which is, if you focused on the need svara, one second, let me just analyze Yonatan first. Right? If you focus on the need svara, right, that you're paying for service, so what's the Ramban's argument? That if it's put on the community, so the rabbis can plausibly say, look, it's not really me. It's not really my fault. I don't really need this. Elomai, I live in we live in Vilna, right? We live in Vilna. And what can you do? There are a lot of people live in Vilna. Not everyone's a Talmid Chacham. But that is only plausible if the way the king puts the tax is on the community. Because then the Talmid Chacham would say, it wasn't me. It wasn't my fault. But if it's put on each person individually, so then Yonatan says, no. Right? Then, so you're saying you have to take it as an indication that they're not the real Talmid Chacham. I don't know if you have to go that far, right? But you could just say that the argument that I'm not really partaking of this is no longer true because it was specifically put on my head. Is it because that proves he's not really a Talmid Chacham, or it proves that when we say Talmidei Chachamim don't need security, it means they normally don't. But in a case when it's framed as such, clearly God wants it, or whatever it is, the point is that you can't argue that you don't need it, that you're not paying the service, because you can only make that argument when it was a communal obligation. You can claim that that you're not really part of it, just looks like you are. Right? But if it's about kavod, right, or if it's about service, so then what would you say? Then it gets a little bit harder, right? Right, meaning if it's about kavod, you could argue that no, right? Just like, think about where the Rambam says you're exempt from both types of taxes. He says in Hilchot Talmud Torah, where he also says that if you're going to, right, if you are a merchant and you're a Talmid Chacham, we have to let you do it first. Clearly what we're saying is that other people actually have an obligation to help you financially, right? And this is where I think we have to push, one second. Where we have to, what? Not pay for you, right? But, what? What? Correct, but what what's the Rambam getting at? That the reason you're exempt from taxes is because you're not supposed to be paid for Torah, but the honor due to the Talmid Chacham actually obligates the community in certain ways to benefit you financially. Not to pay you, but to allow you to work first, have the first dibs in the marketplace, which is clearly a financial gain, right? People will pay, right? People will bid for that, right? So the community has to give that to you. Because kavod says that it's not just that you don't need it, it's that we actually have to. Now, therefore, if you think it's kavod, you could argue, as the Rambam does, that it doesn't matter how this tax is formulated. Right? In the end of the day, the community has to take care of this for you, and that's not the same as paying you. Right? It's mavriach ari, right, is the phrase in the Gemara. It's chasing away a lion from you. And if you think it's about the trade formulation also, you could say, look, right, it's not that I don't need it, it's that I've already contributed to society. I've done my share. In that model as well, you could argue that even if it's a individual tax, in the end of the day, the community has to pay for you, because it's not that you're really exempt, it's that you have already contributed. right? The only model where it's clear-cut that you should be that you should be liable is if you think it's about the service model. Because then you'll say, look, if I don't need it, which I can argue when it's framed as a communal obligation, then I don't have to pay. When it's placed on my head, whether that shows I'm not real Talmid Chacham or it shows that this is the type of time when I do need security, if it's on my head, it's on my head. You can't tell me I don't need it. Clearly I do. The king picked me out of the crowd and said I'm obligated. Okay, Ezra's hand is falling off. Go.
I was just gonna say that, like, you do it as, like, a little one that has a lot, right? If you do it as there's a lot of prohibition to taxes on top of something, which would indicate that, like, a head tax, you do a head tax, means something, if the king's Jewish, that are going to be violating that.
We're not talking about a Jewish king. We're talking about the community owes this to an outsider.
Something, but if it was, then I guess maybe violating that. But there's, and the only halacha is on him, but once it's placed, but if he just said on the community, then as a community deciding as a Talmid Chacham has to pay, and they're over that district. But
I mean, I don't know. We haven't really introduced mitzvot. I mean, maybe kavod Torah is a mitzvah in that sense, but
I'm saying but the halacha of Talmidei Chachamim not paying taxes, is that something that is it something that you have a responsibility to ensure that they don't pay taxes, or is that you are not allowed?
I mean, I think you're meaning. If I put it a little bit differently, I think you're right that the formulation of kavod sounds more like there's an obligation for us as a community to ensure actively that the Talmid Chacham is taken care of by avoiding taxation for him, right? As opposed to the other formulation, which is just like, right, unless it's actively opposed on the Talmid Chacham, we can't impose it, right? I don't know if that's aseh lo taseh. They don't really mitzvot here. Maybe the kavod Torah is, right? But, right, not charging him tax doesn't seem to be about a prohibition. It's just saying it's definitely a negative, right? He doesn't partake.
I mean, it's just like you're over like whatever, like you're over a bunch of like.
Right, meaning, okay, fine. Fine. If you want to formulate it that way, I guess you could.
You have a positive responsibility.
But I think you're right? That another way of formulating this is that the kavod generates a positive obligation to take care of the Talmid Chacham by helping him avoid taxes, which would clearly push us, right, expand the circle here of the things that might be included. Whereas the negative formulation, which is if he doesn't need it, so then he doesn't have to pay for it, well, when that argument falls away because it's on his head, it's by person, so then, then the obligation, right? Clearly you do need it. Why, whether that proves you're not a real Talmid Chacham or not, I don't know. I don't think you have to go quite that far. But it's clear that you do need it because that's how the king formulated it. Yes, Jonathan.
I would see Rambam justify changing the economical norm for people who are Talmidei Chachamim. It's not what we translate like people say from.
Right, so this is the very, very, right, this is, the Rambam is very much, he's threading the needle there, right, where he's saying that taking money for Talmud Torah is benefiting from Talmud Torah. But allowing the Talmid Chacham the first dibs at business is simply respect, right? Even though it has financial implications to it, what? Correct. And that he thinks you can do, because that he thinks is a function of honor, right? He thinks that allowing look. One second. Look. I think for the Rambam, look. The Rambam thinks you need to show honor to Talmidei Chachamim. So if you had a Talmid Chacham and he was, waiting in line for lunch, right? You might let him go ahead of you. You probably should. Right? If Rabbi Chait was eating lunch here, I think we'd all just let him take food first, right? And then, and then the rest of us would take. So the Rambam says, well, look, the same, what? Okay. I don't think that, fine. But my point is that the fact that you also would let him, if you had 10 esrog sellers and he decided to go into the esrog selling business, the fact that you would let him, right, sell first because you don't want him to have to hang around and you don't want to have to waste some time and, and if possible, you like to benefit it, right? That's a different type of thing because, look, you're not giving him money. He's selling you an esrog, but you're letting him sell it first. You're letting him have first dibs. Now, obviously, that gives him a financial advantage, but he's not being paid for Talmud Torah. You're showing him respect, which has financial implications. And the Rambam thinks that's okay, but paying him directly for Torah is not. Because in the end of the day, I let Talmidei Chachamim go first in general. Not always does that have a financial implication. It might, right? But it's not like once letting a Talmid Chacham go first has financial implications, now it's puzzle.
So why then, out of honor, can you, out of honor, then, buy a house, free milk or whatever? You might say that you're doing out of honor, but in reality, basically for the Talmud.
So again, I don't know if the Rambam would be, right? The Rambam is saying you can't take a salary for it, but would the Rambam say that, right? I don't know if the Rambam would say, look, let's say every person, let's leave the house aside, right? Let's take a very simple case where I think it'd be hard to say it's a problem, right? I don't want extremes. We'll start to have to say, are you faking something? But let's say, the average person invests in his continuing education, I don't know, $1,000 a year, right? Whether that means continuing credit seminars that doctors need and lawyers need and business professionals need, right? Or that means, doctors buying a subscription to the New England Journal of Medicine to make sure they're up on the newest research or whatever it is, right? Let's say the average person comes out to $1,000 a year, okay? For a Talmid Chacham, let's say that means that he invests $1,000 a year in new Svarim, right? In updating his Bar Ilan so he can make his source sheets and buying himself the newest Svarim so that he's aware of, what's going on and whatever, right? Would you say that it's benefiting from Talmud Torah if, the yeshiva says, gives the Rosh Yeshiva a stipend every year to buy new Svarim, right? Or buy his Svarim for him, let's say, right? It's, we're learning Bava Basra, so we picked up the newest, deluxe Oz Vahadar and Mesivta, right? You are, but correct, but that's also true if someone sends him, fine, an even better case, okay? The 5 new Svarim are published in Bava Basra this year. And the authors hear that Rabbi Ginsburg is teaching Bava Basra this year, so they send him free copies, right? Because they want him to use it, because they want a haskama, right? And they're like, you learn Bava Basra anyways, I'll send you a free copy of the book, and, do you mind writing a haskama? Do you mind, right? Yeah, but correct. But my point is that there are things where there's going to be a financial benefit, where clearly what's really happening is that someone is showing honor to the Talmid Chacham, right? And I think in the end of the day, what the Rambam is going to tell you is that things that are fundamentally about honor for Talmidei Chachamim, that's mutter. The fact that it has financial implications is fine. What's not okay is to be paid for Torah. That's what the Rambam thinks is usher. Yes, I agree. But let me give you another case, okay? Let me give you one more case. 1 second, Ezra. Let me give you one more. Let me give you one more case, okay? Average person, when he flies in to right, he takes a flight. So most people. Definitely, if it's a long flight, they end up taking a cab to and from the airport because, it's not worth paying for long-term parking. It's worth paying the $75 or whatever it is to the airport, so they don't have to worry about it, right? If when ever any Rosh Yeshiva flies in, right, they will either ask a senior Talmud or something, would you like to pick up, whoever, or Shechter, from the airport? And people will jump at the opportunity. Now, are they saving Rav Shechter the $75 cab ride? 100%. But clearly, right, that the fact that the Talmud Chacham is being driven by one of his students, that's not real. What's really going on is not that they're giving him the $75 bonus, right? What's going on is that the Talmidim want to show him respect by escorting him, and they get the opportunity to spend time with him. And sure, there are financial implications to that. And I think that's exactly the point, right? But no, I think that's exactly the point, is that in this case, there is a clear financial benefit, the $75 for the cab ride. But this is an act of kavod. And I think what the Rambam is going to say, is that things that are fundamentally an act of kavod, because, take the businessman. You could say that the reason you're letting the Talmud Chacham businessman go first is to give him financial benefit. But it could equally be because you know that the Talmud Chacham is going to, he's selling 10 esrogim. And you know that until he sells his 10, he's not going to go back to yeshiva and learn, because he has to wait until he sells all of his merchandise. And you want the Talmud Chacham to be able to go back and learn Torah. So you let him do business. Now, which is motivating you here? Probably a little bit of both, right? But you can definitely conceptualize this as honor, respect for his time. So in that case, even though there are financial implications, the Rambam will say it's okay, because you're not paying him for Talmud Torah, right? Now the Chiddush here is that the Rambam thinks the same thing is true of taking care of his taxes, right? Which is interesting, right?
If you think that taking care of his taxes is a fundamentally honor thing, but taking care of taxes is fundamentally something that an honor comes. It seems easy to extrapolate from that to take care of other financial burdens of.
Correct. And in general in halacha we have this notion there's a difference between mavriach ari and paying, where we don't think that paying off someone's debts even is the same as paying him. It's called mavriach ari. Is you had a lion chasing you and we got rid of the lion. Right? In halacha we do distinguish, even though in the end of the day the how much you have in your pocket is the same, conceptually those are distinct.
Does that mean that the Talmud Chacham should take out a mortgage on the house and then other people can pay that off and it won't be a problem?
I don't know. Ezra, go. What was your question? I don't know. I know this back and forth with the other time went long, but that's okay, right? It is a fine line and a thin line.
I couldn't remember the term. I was like, thin line? Yeah, thin line sounds right. So it's like,
it's a fine line, sure. Like an Eruv. A thin, right? Okay. But that, I think, is one good nafkamina, right? Where you see that if you conceptualize this about the need, so as soon as you reframe the tax in a way that seems to make it impossible to deny that this is directed at Talmud Chacham, so then he's chayav. That's Ramban's argument. But if you think that, no, it's not just about need, but it's about other things, so then you can expect a position like the Rambam, the Yad Ramah, yeah.
I remember.
Which is, by the way, how we paskin, or the actual paskin. Yes.
Can you say that it is a source for the Talmud Chacham to actively try to get stuff out of the fact that it's Talmud Chacham?
Yes, that might be problematic. Right, you can also distinguish between him pursuing it, which obviously demanding a salary is more direct in that sense, than I didn't ask for this, the king put a tax here, right, and the community is just taking care of the tax. Yeah, there might be another way of distinguishing.
So, while there is a positive obligation upon someone, like a merchant or whatever, say, oh, you do a purchase or whatever, you probably not someone where say, hey, I'm a Talmud Chacham, you better not sell your things, you better let me go first. That would be problematic?
Possibly, yes. Right? Possibly. Okay. Where'd Jonathan go? Okay, so that's one nafkamina. Are we clear? Right? Are we clear on this nafkamina? Yes. Okay. Let's. Okay, I'm not going to go to the thumbs over until Jonathan makes it back. So a second nafkamina, fine. So another nafkamina that we talked about already yesterday was the question of whether you could expand this exemption to other types of taxes, right? Where we noted that if you really think this is a need, right, a pay-for-services conceptualization, so the only thing we have in the Gemara that they dafka don't need is shmira, nitiruta. But any other tax, so then they're chayav. But what did we already see in the Rambam? That the Rambam expanded it to some other, not all, but to some other types of taxes that are imposed by the king. Right? So we already mentioned yesterday that this is another nafkamina, right? Which is clear in the Rambam, is that if you think this is only about a need-based service payment model, so then it only applies to the thing that the Gemara outlined that Talmidei Chachamim don't need, and anything that they do need, so then they're chayav. But if it's a tax which is not directly security related, and therefore we don't have this argument of Talmidei Chachamim lo tzrichim teruta to exempt you, so then you're going to be chayav. But somebody said, I don't know who it was, but it might also have been Yonatan, that there really is a third way of taking this, which is saying that maybe the reason that you could argue that Talmidei Chacham is exempt, not just, actually no, I think it was Andrew, right? I think it was Andrew, right? That technically there's a third direction that's between those two, which is to say maybe Talmidei Chachamim are in fact exempt from some other taxes, some other tributes to the king, but not because we full-throated accept the kavod model or the service they already contribute model. Oh, that was one of your models. You had a different model, right? I think within security, someone had a security model, which was that maybe other taxes that are tributes to the king. Oh, is Ezra's? Okay, then Ezra. So, but Ezra said, no, there's really a third model here, which is maybe really this is just about service. But you're being reductionist when you think that the only type of tax that is actually about security are ones that are called security tax. In a non-Jewish society, not like the modern democracy, but in a feudal society where you live securely at the good grace of the king or the baron, the feudal lord, whatever. So it could be that you would argue that Talmidei Chacham is exempt from other tributes, because you expand the notion of security. Security is anything that practically functions to increase our security here, and that might not just be the things that we technically pay for the walls, but it might include tribute that we pay to the baron, the feudal lord, so that they protect us. Right? That was what you said?
Yeah.
Good. So who says that? Who says that explicitly? Right? Because the Ramban is at one extreme. The Ramban says it's only security tax. The Rambam, at first glance, sounds like it's the other extreme, that it's more expansive than that because of kavod. But who says, no, it really is about security because it's about need, but it's still more expansive? Who says that? I should have asked you if you'd seen it yet, but okay. The Rush. Okay, you hadn't seen it yet? Fine. Well, then I guess I'll read it to you because I've already given it away. I've given away the ending, so I'll just read you the line in the Rush. The Rush, this is in Aleph Chavtet, says as follows. V'katzav Rebbeinu Yosef, he quotes the Rimigash, Kimil to dislay nitiruta liyadme gon mini paronos, avarnes lo ramina nayatme. says, V'yira li, it seems to me, the chol minei misim midei dinetirutan, to all these taxes are security. Because that's what keeps us safe. The fact that we pay tribute after tribute after tribute is what keeps us safe amongst the non-Jews. What other benefit do these non-Jews have to let us live among them? The benefit, the reason they let us live here at all is because we pay taxes. And therefore, he writes that maybe we should stick with the security model, but an expanded security model. So what Yonatan missed was simply this one point, was that the second nafkamina that we already began discussing yesterday as to whether this is only about service, and therefore it's only security, or whether it's about honor or the contribution to society, is, do you think that it extends beyond security tax? If you think it's about paying for service, no. If you think it's about kavod, so then yes, it's going to be more expensive. But Ezra had suggested that, no, maybe there's actually a middle model, which is really we conceptualize the exemption of taxes based on the Talmidei Chachamim only pay for what they need, and they don't need security. And nevertheless, we should expand that to certain other tributes. Why? Because the reality was that what kept you safe from your non-Jewish neighbors wasn't just the money you put into the wall, was the tributes that you paid that made the non-Jew, the feudal lord, put up with the Jews living amongst him, which is a middle position, right? And that is indeed the position of the Rosh. That the Rosh says, the reason that we extend these exemptions beyond just wall tax is because tribute and things like that are also, in the end of the day, functional security taxes. Because as he said, what other reason could these feudal lords have for letting us live here? Now, for modern Jews, besides for Ezra, not all of us jumped to that conclusion. But for medieval Jews, that was the most logical, practical conclusion to jump to, simply because if you know anything about Jewish history in pretty much anywhere in the world, you know that the Jews were often brought in for that reason, right? To pay taxes, because they were good businessmen and would pay taxes. And often Jews were, right, a lot of the pogroms happened, why? So sometimes because they were moneylenders, and sometimes because the Jews were financially better off because the local baron only allowed the Jews to come because they were wealthy and would pay taxes, and therefore they lived there as under the protection of the baron, which made locals angry. And eventually, sometimes the barons just said, it's not worth dealing with this resentment, because resentment is building up against me. Instead of letting them have a full-out coup against me, I have a better idea, which is, let me direct the resentment at the people until now protecting, and let them take it out against the Jews. Okay. Third nafkamina to this question, right, that touches on this question, is the question that Yehonatan dealt with, which is, are there different types of walls, right? Even within the wall discussion, are there different types of walls? So, this is the question that the Chassam Sofer deals with. So the first thing the Chassam Sofer does is, as a side point, deals with Adam's question that Adam asked a few days ago, which was, wait a second, why are we poskening halacha based on the policy decisions of Artaxasta, or which is itself a fulfillment of the decrees of Cyrus, right, to exempt the rabbis? So that the Chassam Sofer simply answers by saying, because Ezra was the rabbinic advisor to Artaxasta, and therefore we assume that any policy he instituted had the haskama of Ezra, and Ezra is a darn good posek. Fine, okay? Close parentheses on that. We do. I told you, Chazal literally think that Ezra Chazal literally think that Ezra was as great as Moshe Rabbeinu, right? They say it in those words, that had the Torah not been given by Moshe, then it would have been given by Ezra, and that is why he was mechadesh a new ktav in the Torah, to show that he essentially was giving us a new Torah, right? He is the father of Torah Shabbal Peh. He just is, right? So I wouldn't say we worship him, but right, we don't worship him, but if there was someone you would worship, it would be Ezra, essentially. That's how much we like Ezra. What? No, we don't actually worship him. We don't actually worship the moon either. I got it. Fine. So the yeah.
Did you just throw out the idea of the time thing, or that money is time and we don't want to take away from the time we need?
We didn't throw it out. Okay. We didn't throw it out, right? If you take that model, I said, in that type of model, right, you also could say that it's more expensive. Yeah, potentially. Okay, so that's the first claim the Chasam Sofer. Then the Chasam Sofer is the second claim. And again, I didn't want to get into all the complexity here, which is, are Talmidei Chachamim chayev in machzor shekel, and is machzor shekel used for the walls of Yerushalayim, which is a very complicated discussion in the Tosefta, but there's a what? I mean, it's a very, very complicated discussion in the Tosefta and you know, the Mordechai, and I basically wanted to, you know, minimize the sources, so I kept you away from all of that. So that's really the background to this whole discussion. But the Chasam Sofer, after going through that, what does he argue? He says, in the end of the day, based on certain assumptions he makes about the Machzor Shekel and the Trumas Halishka and its relationship with the walls of Yerushalayim, fine, right? He makes the claim that Talmidei Chachamim are obligated in paying towards the walls of Yerushalayim. Right? That is the upshot of his claim. And he says why, right? Yeah. What does he say? He says, because there are two types of security. There is security from our non-Jewish neighbors when we are in Galut, and then there are walls that we put up to secure one nation from another. And he claims that the walls of Yerushalayim are the latter, and the walls that the Gemara is talking about are the former, and Talmidei Chachamim are obligated in that type of security tax. Now, pray tell, why does he say that? What? They pay for the ones that are between nations, right? You read it? You read the Chasam Sofer. He said, the walls that are being Malchut to Malchut, they do pay for, and that's the type of wall Yerushalayim is. Why would you say such a thing?
Because I would assume that the Chasam Sofer holds that it is legal for a lawless power to draft Jews.
What does that do with draft?
Oh, because it's all about war. Come on,
We're talking about a wall.
I know, but it's not a defense wall, it's an offensive wall.
No.
No.
No, not at all. Come on. It's defensive. Okay, Adam. What? Yeah, so. Yeah, what about it? No, he's saying like between kingdoms. Not necessarily that, meaning the walls that a sovereign Jewish state puts up, that's his point. They are obligated in to protect them from war. Right? And that's different than Jews living in Galut. Why? Ezra Yonatan.
While even everyone benefits from the existence of the sovereign state, so and the protections afforded to Talmidei Chachamim aren't necessarily afforded from God, aren't necessarily afforded to the state at large. So it's like they have a stake in something.
Okay, good. So Ezra gives one possibility, which is that if it's about service, so a wall, when you are a minority in Galut, is really just a wall. It's just security. But the wall around a sovereign state that protects you from the enemies is more than that. It is symbolic of the state and all the benefits that accrue because of statehood. And even if the Talmid Chacham doesn't need the security aspect, all the other things that come along with it, that a Talmid Chacham benefits from, and he is therefore going to have to pay. Yes, Ezra, you want to add to that?
Yeah, or.
Oh, an or. Okay, that's one possibility, right? One possibility is that this is limiting even within the service conceptualization and saying not all things that look like security. Right? This is the opposite of the Rush. The Rush says that some things that don't look like security are in fact security. And the Chassam Sofer is telling you that not all things that look like they're just about security are in fact just about security. Right? Good. That's one possibility. What else?
Or you could say that, I know there's like a concept with probably with the hostage, everyone's ever taking it, right? So in that sense, being forced to contribute isn't even something that is damaging to one's cover.
Very good. So the other possibility is what Yehonasan and I had said before, and this is what I read the Chassam Sofer is more saying, right, is no. Right? If I had to guess what the Chassam Sofer is getting at, is that it's not just about security, right? We've talked about that the exemption of Talmid Chacham is also about kavod. It's one thing to say that as a minority amongst the nations, right, the fact that we need a wall to protect ourselves in the ghetto, like that is just not honorable. So that, Talmidei Chachamim are above that. But in a sovereign state, the wall that you have, that's not showing weakness, right? In the same way, there's not the ghetto wall, right? In the end of the day, and you think about it, right? What's the difference between, right? Or to put it differently, right? If crime increases in your little, whatever, right? And the police are just not responsive enough. So people get together and they say, we've got to set up a night watch, right? That's evidence of weakness, right? Meaning we live in a state. Really, it should be the police doing it, but they're not doing their job. They're not taking care of us enough, right? So, we're stuck. We need to set up a watch. Right? And when you see, the person going around, you don't feel oh, right, this is honorable. But that's not the same with the IDF, right? People take pride in having the IDF, right? When you see Riv Goren, right, blowing the shofar in his madim, right, in his uniform, on the famous picture of 1967, and blowing the shofar in full uniform at the Kotel, you don't look and say, oh, miskin, he had to stand up for himself, right? You say, the security measures of a state, the fact that we have an army and can defend ourselves is actually honorable, right? So if it's about honor, I would say that, look, there's a difference between security that you pay for that is evidence of weakness and the security you engage in as an expression of independence, right? And therefore, if it's about kavod, I would say that makes a lot of sense, that the wall that you're paying for in the ghetto, that the Talmid Chacham should be above that. But the walls of Yerushalayim, right? I mean, just think, if you're just talking about the walls of Yerushalayim, what Talmid Chacham would not want to say, I helped build those? Actually, no. Right? How do I know that? Because their name literally means Shomrei Ha'ir. That's literally their name. Neturei Karta, Neturei is Shomrim, Karta is ear in Aramaic. Neturei Karta literally means Shomrei Ha'ir. It is a badge of pride for them. by the way, that's actually what they're getting at. You understand that, see, okay, parenthetically, that's actually their, oh, right, I forgot to tell you. You understand that this Gemara is actually one of the basis for the choice of that name. Yes, it's because the state thinks they're the people who are protecting us, but it's not true. Talmidei Chachamim, Torah is what protects us. They think the army are the Shomrei Ha'ir. We're the real Shomrei Ha'ir. We're the Neturei Karta. Right? That's actually where the name comes from. Is it a theological claim that the state is not really what's protecting us, but it's Torah? So I'm glad you brought it up, because that's actually, our Gemara is, their understanding of our Gemara and other related Gemaras is actually the theological basis for the name they chose for themselves, which is that we are the Shomrim of Yerushalayim, the real Shomrim of Yerushalayim. But now you know why they call themselves Neturei Karta, because Neturei Karta means Shomrei Ha'ir, that they think they're the real protectors of the city, and they got it from our Gemara.
And that's why they have actually,
Yes, Jonathan.
well, we see that it comes to a very more expense, and that it's not just that it's like a cover with really multiple time, but rather, if there is a sovereign state that shows sovereign king of Israel, that the cover of a sovereign king of Israel is to be, at least some people are even involved with some.
Yeah, you could say that, right? I mean, he doesn't invoke Melech, and that's why I'm not going, right, per se, right? He's saying that, but maybe, right, you could say that, yeah, and the Talmud Chacham is high on the totem pole. To show honor to the king is not beneath him, a Jewish king, right? Yeah, you could go in that direction also.
Could be, at least contribute to the change, for example, could be something that comes with the subject.
Potentially, yeah.
Also, would you say that, like, looking at, like, that model of, speaker and kind of build a wall, and therefore, that exemption, would you say it's, like, similar to with the whole accepting stuff from a non-Jew thing?
Yeah, very good, right? I think you're definitely right. That this is part of the same, yes, right? Part of the same type of value scheme that we saw in the context of taking money from non-Jews, where the assumption was the Chilul Hashem, because it reveals the fact that you can't support yourself, you need the largesse of your non-Jewish benefactor, and we mentioned that there was that one shita that therefore was machadesh, that if the non-Jews aren't contributing in galut, but they're contributing to the sovereign state, that you actually could take it because it's a sign of honor. The fact that they, right, because there's a difference between a handout and a contribution, right, essentially, right? Yes, exactly, that too, obviously. But yes, right, that Svara who said that the Christian Zionist contributions to the state is actually a statement of honor, right, because they want to come and support us, right, rather than Ezem Miskenim, right, these poor Jews who live among us, we need to give them some handouts, right, follows the same type of model that I'm suggesting within the Chassam Sofer, which was originally Yonatan's model, so we finally saw it inside. But yes, what? Okay. Yes.
And also, would you say that would you say the possibility in looking through the color model is that it's not that with all these taxes, what you're doing, these tax economies are coming for whatever purposes, not that you're like violating their cover, but if they contribute to the tax, they are basically declaring it's not that they are paying for something they don't need, it's that they are then saying it is something they need. So they're basically saying that they don't have faith in the fact that.
Yes, I think that's definitely true, right? I think that part of the cheshbon might be, right, that it's not just about them, right? It's a statement of values, correct, right? That by saying that the rabbis do need to contribute, it might even be problematic in that model, because you're saying they need it, and the Torah isn't enough to protect them, correct? Okay? So far we've seen 3 potential nafkaminas to test these, right? One was, is it more expansive to other taxes, which we said, if it's only about security, no. If it's about some honor or contribution to society, maybe yes, unless you take a middle model like the Rush, right, which is that in Galut, certain taxes and tributes are essentially paying for your security, even though that's not what they're called. The second nafkamina we saw was, or the nafkamina we just saw, the Chassam Sofer's which is what happens if the type of security you're talking about is broader. It actually is a sign of honor and dignity, right? That's how I would take it. So then it might flip, right? That if it's about honor, so then when it's the honorable thing, it's your independent army, right? It's your wall between a country, right? It's your dignity, right? Rather than, the ghetto wall. So then maybe you do obligate the Talmid Chacham, right? Though we noted that maybe the Chassam Sofer is really just, getting in on needs, right? And as Ezra said, in possibility one of Ezra, right? Which is that there's a difference between, the minimal needs of what a ghetto wall provides and what a national wall provides, which it provides other things. And the third was the Ramban's question, which is the Machlokes Rishon and Ramban versus the Rambam, Ramban versus the Rama, which is what happens if it's framed as a security tax but a head tax. So, if it's about honor, you might say, no, other people actually have to cover your tax. If it's about contributions to society, so then they might actually have to cover your taxes. But with the aside that we talked about, the Yehonatan, how then do you distinguish that from taking money for Talmud Torah directly? But if you think it's about need, so it's one thing to say, I don't need it when it's framed as an obligation on the community, so maybe I don't technically need it, and you can't prove that I need it because it wasn't framed directly as an obligation on me. But if it's framed as an obligation on me, right, so then the Talmid Chacham can't say, I don't need it. What do you mean you do need it? It was framed as an obligation on you. And that shows something, that indicates something about who this is aimed at. Yes?
And also, like the whole, it's like, it's God's cover because you're basically making a basic, trust in God. So, I think that fits really well with the whole, if the king is doing it, then you not stepping in isn't a statement of anything, but if you are like the leader of the community or one of the leaders guides of the community, then it is a statement.
Yeah. Okay. So what nafke mina do I have left for you? So you guys haven't read the Rush, is what you're telling me. You haven't done the Rush yet.
I think we did, but we did one of them yesterday. There was the one where it ended up talking about or something where
Okay, so let's say this. Tomorrow, look back. I read you already Chavtet, which was the expanded security model, the Rush. So let's not go back to that. But the second half of Halacha Chav Vav the Rush sets up begins the discussion of which type of Talmid Chacham are we talking about. Okay? So I want you to see that, because that was a question we opened with, which is what are we really talking about? What type of Talmid Chacham is it really about? Tzaddik, right? Which is another nafka mina here, right? So I want you to see his discussion, though there really is a lot more to see, but I want you at least to see his discussion. I'm not going to force you to read all the people inside, but at least get the ball rolling and what type of Talmid Chacham you think matters here. On that note, I would say, I didn't give you this yet, but I would say look at the Marsha. The Marsha is going to be the one who is going to say something very similar to, I think it was Andrew who said it, about the taking the time away, picking up on one line that we skipped over in the Agadata, which was so this is actually an Agadic statement of the Marsha, but he notes that the Gemara on Ched Amud Aleph had noted that when describing Talmidei Chachamim, it describes them as Heimtu Kula Raglecha, something having to do with feet, right? And the Gemara had said, why? What does that mean? So Rabbi Yosef had said, Elu Talmidei Chachamim shemechatetim ragleihem me'ir le'ir medina medina lilmod Torah. These are Talmidei Chachamim who wear down their feet by walking from city to city to teach Torah, right? If we focus on that model, there are different ways you could take this that might hit on maybe we've been conceptualizing this exemption wrong. So I want you to see the Marsha. You know where to get the Marsha, right? Marsha and Rosh are both in the back of the Gemara. And we didn't get a chance today to talk about the Radbaz. What? Do you finish the Radbaz? Okay, fine. So finish the Radbaz, and that's the unique case where the Talmidei Chachamim are rich, and therefore they're the only people who need security, and the poor people don't need security because they have nothing to their money. Right? There's nothing to secure. So what do you do in a case like that? Which is another way of pushing this. What else did I send you? I sent you the Ramban. I gave you the Rosh, and I'm telling you just focus on Chaf Vav because I already said Chaf Tet. The Radbaz. What else did I give you? What? And I gave you the Chasam Sofer. Fine, and I would just add, okay, and look at Tosfot, the first Tosfot in Chet Amud Aleph. It's only 2 lines, right? And I think with that we can finish up this part in one day, okay? What I haven't shown you yet, but I don't think we'll do it inside, but we do have to talk about it, this Gemara became a machloket in terms of whether we can derive from this Gemara that the current exemption that is so heated in Israel that kolol guys are patur from going to the army, right? This was one of the major Gemaras that was brought into play. Do you want me to give you things inside, or should we just say that I'll relegate 15 minutes or so at the end, hopefully, to summarize the modern discussion about that? Or, okay, I'll bring a brief discussion of it, and if you want to read it, I'll give it to you tomorrow, but focus on these primary sources. Then, the one more thing I want to do in this sugya, I think before we move on to the next issues, is the issue from the story of Rebbe and Yonatan ben Amram, which was, we mentioned it briefly, but the question of when Rebbe didn't want to give money to the Amei Haaretz, what exactly was he doing that? Was that he wanted to give Talmidei Chachamim first, or that he actively didn't want to fund the Amei Haaretz? And if that's the case, why would that be the case? Ooh, Adam, be careful. So to that end, you could look at the Ritzvah, right, which is Nifsak Lach and Shulchan Aruch. You look at the Marsha and the Kovit Shirim. And that would bring us basically to what I want to do until the end of the page. And that's within sort of holding myself back. That's what I want to cover till the end of the page. And then we'll continue, right? Then there's stuff on the Amud. Do you have an interest in going deep specifically into the unique nature of Pidyon Shvuyim, or no? I wasn't planning on it, but I can do it if you want. Otherwise, I want to move to the guild sugyot and then talk about unions and strikes and stuff like that. Okay, you guys think about it. Okay, but that's the plan for the next 2 days. Okay.